Well, here we are, Renee, another episode of Stepping in It. What are we focusing on today?
Well, we started our last episode kind of talking about lots and lots of challenges. There's lots of kind of upheaval in the world. So today we're really going to focus on what does it mean to lead during these challenging times? And we've been doing that. You've been doing that out with organizations and groups. I've been leading my own group through challenging times with just different challenges. So I thought it might be a lot of sense for us to kind of do a little deeper dive into some of the things we help and teach others to do, but also just sort of
Yeah.
like what are some resources for people out there that are like, gosh, times are hard. How do I help my coworkers, my friends, my colleagues, my family, and help them deal with what's going on in our lives today? So to kick us off, though, what's going on in the farm kind of here in May?
Well, I thought I'd tie it back to leadership on the farm because it's the same thing. It's a business. And we got
Yeah.
to think about leadership in the same way. And, my favorite magazine, Renee, is Successful Farming. I don't know if you read Successful Farming or not, but you should pick up it.
Can't
You
say I
should pick it
do.
up this month. I'm just
I
thinking you
should
should pick
get
it
a
up this
copy.
month.
All right, I'll work on
Um,
that.
but, I was reading in there and farm bankruptcies have increased 55% last year
Gee,
compared to 2023, and they're trending even higher. Right.
man,
And so, we're
that's not good.
dealing with commodity prices, higher input costs. And that's a lot the same as a lot of the providers we talk about. And, you
Yeah,
kind of talked about what we do in the healthcare industry. And there's a lot of similarities. And so,
yeah,
as I think about the challenging year I'm having on the farm, bridging from last
yeah,
year to this year, cutting costs,
right.
kind of containing costs and thinking ahead, I think it has a lot of relevance, the conversation we're going to have about how do we manage forward in challenging times, because these are challenging times. And so let's get back to the basics. What
That's
does
right.
it mean to manage in challenging times, Renee?
Yep. So let's sort of set the stage. So whenever we go out and talk to people or we ever go out and do presentations, we sort of start with kind of a level set of what's happened in the last 5 years to get us to these challenging times. Because challenging times aren't just today. I mean, you could go back and
Yeah.
look. I did a Google research on this topic today, and the top article that came up with the Psychology Association was from 2010, was economic hard times in the 2010s. And if you go back past
Yep.
that, you just keep rolling back. So it's a cyclical issue where we have economic challenges, where we have financial challenges. It's cyclical. So it's not like it's a one and done situation. So we've learned some
Mhm.
things in the past. And those are the types of things we want to talk about today, or what is working, what can help when it's not going well, because we've gone through it before and we'll have good times again. But in the meantime, how do we kind of focus on this? Because what we know for sure, change always happens. Always. And when it's going to come back around again. So let's level set. So, Jason, when we start off a presentation, we kind of talk about all those challenges. The whole podcast universe knows we've gone through a lot of things. But what do we try to pull out of that conversation? We just pull out anxiety, depression, talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like peeling an onion, right? We kind of look at what is different though, and we've seen more extremes, right? And
Yeah.
I think we can kind of just be relatable to the fact that, yeah, change is constant, but the extreme nature of change. And so kind of what we like to point out is that anxiety and depression data that we have that happened from 2020 through the end of 2024 shows that our general population, anxiety and depression twice as high, three times as high as it was in 2019. And that
Hmm.
continued until they stopped collecting the data in 2024 at the end of the year.
Right.
And
Right.
so part of our comparisons were people are more anxious and depressed, which then, we see anecdotally people drinking more, right? Every state we go to, we pull their local alcohol board data. We look at, how much alcohol has been sold in the previous several years.
Hmm.
Guess what? We always see in every state we go to an increase over the course of the past 10 years of year over year increases in alcohol sales. And then
Yep.
we throw in, because a lot of states have legalized some form of marijuana, we throw
Hmm.
that in, and then we see huge tax revenues. And so
Hmm.
that kind of helps us to understand where are people spending their money. Well, we can see data on alcohol and
Yeah.
marijuana. We don't know what other substances are spending money on because we don't tax those yet. So we can see what the trend line looks at. But that starts to set the stage for kind of a definite increased anxiety and depression and ways that we manage it that may or may not be healthy.
Yeah. One of the ones we haven't put in our slide deck yet, but maybe we should, is gambling. Man, sports betting is just
Yeah.
off the rock. I mean,
Yep.
it's unbelievable. And I was new to that issue. But wow, it's a lot of money. And so then you've got gambling and financial debts, all of that rolls into each other, and lottery, just the whole thing. Some of the other things
Hmm.
we'd like to talk about too is isolation. We're not, the
Yeah.
Surgeon General now a couple years ago put out a big article that being isolated is actually can be more damaging to a person than smoking a whole lot of cigarettes in a day or being sedentary or being obese. And which is was eye-opening and kind of jaw-dropping to most of us because you don't think of social isolation as more damaging than some of those quote bad behaviors. But being isolated, and that happened really strongly through the COVID
Well,
pandemic and has continued.
and more recent data that I've been, we've been connecting to that to help it be more relatable is the percentage of people eating alone. And although that seems kind of an odd thing to think about, we see more people eating alone than we have in previous decades. And we sometimes we pull out the book, we see less bowling alleys, less bowling leagues. I love some of that kind of off the cuff data because it means there's less socialization, there's less connection in our communities. And so sometimes I think of that when I'm alone at a conference and I go and sit at the table alone for supper. If I hadn't made friends that day or I get in late, or I'm at an airport, sometimes I just go eat at the bar so I can talk to people because, everyone's alone in some of those
Yes,
places. And so,
true.
you socialize, but you'll always see people sitting alone at a table. And so, that tells us something about our society is we are becoming more isolated and there are negative impacts to our health because of that isolation. And that relates directly to your employees, right?
Yes,
As
it
we
does.
think about these things, this isn't just about people served. This is thinking
No.
about our employees and what challenges do our employees face and how is this impacting the workplace?
Absolutely. I'm just kind of laughing to myself because I actually enjoy eating by myself, but I'm pretty introverted, and that's a time for me to re-energize, especially at
Right,
conferences, because I can get so overwhelmed by the number
right,
of people. So I think it depends on the person. We'll throw that out there.
right,
But we're going to run
right.
into some data now, just talk about some of the different things. We've got a really cool resource that has like 67 or 70 data points. I'm not sure. So we're going to pick out a few just to kind of talk through, but get your mind thinking about as a leader of your office, or maybe you're a colleague that you have influence over others, or you're the head of your family. Let's think about this. But some of that data, just to kick us off, there's only 40% of employees rated their leaders as good or excellent in 2022. And that's down from 48% in 2020. That means our leaders aren't awesome. That's not cool. What does that do in an office, Jason, when your leaders, people don't see you as a qualified person?
Well, I mean, that doesn't make for a good environment, right? It doesn't make
No.
for that environment where we're pushing innovation and we want to be the best we can be. I mean, some of the rooms I go in when I sit with leadership teams, you can just see the burnout, and
Yeah.
kind of the hopelessness in people's eyes as you look around the room. And sometimes that's kind of defeating, even for me to be in the room. I'm like, oh, come on, everybody. How can we find a path forward? And I think that's part of, how do the leaders inspire the people around them? And I think that can be really hard in these times. We kind of talked about how much harder it is to inspire people who are coming into work at a deficit already, very
Right.
much likely. And so it sets the bar to be an effective leader even higher than it was even just 10 years ago.
Yeah. Another piece of data here talks about only 60% of leaders connect the purpose of the employee's work to their value, but fewer than
Yeah.
half, about 44% of leaders, don't even understand what their employees do. Wow. If a leader hasn't even put in enough effort to figure out what your employee really does, how are you supposed to be a good leader? How are you supposed to inspire? How are you supposed to help them with their growth and their what they want out of employment? People have jobs for reasons. And a lot of this is money, that's part of it, but often people have a desire, a dream to move somewhere in that path. And if you haven't taken the time to learn who they are, to even know what they want to do, how do you connect them to opportunities that would be a good fit? Or how do you encourage them for promotions that they might be good for if you don't even know what they do? That's a terrible situation. And I can also see you just stepping on people, micromanaging, getting into trouble because you don't know what they do and who's responsible for what. And so then you're probably making all kinds of decisions as a leader that are harmful to your team. And so that one's just bad. And this next one I'm going to
Well,
let you do because you like talk about training because you're always about the training.
yeah, we spend a lot of money. 64% of trainings on using internal resources. Only 26% of training budgets are outsourced. So we just keep training people to do the same thing we've always done, which
Yep.
may or not be effective. or provide value. And I find that really hard because I see so many bad trainings
You just said
that
that to me. I was in another bad training. I won't name the department. Just was it a few days ago? And you're like, how many of these bad trainings do you have to go to? And that's a really valid question because there's a lot of them that I've had to go to and they're painful. And so if you're only going to use your internal people to train only what they already know, where's the growth? Where's the vision? Where's the let's learn new things? It's so depressing. So depressing.
it's an investment. And I think that as we are in these difficult times, we hunker down and we stop investing in the things that are going to give us the bigger return on value in the long term. And so it's really hard to think long term when we're in crisis and just trying to get through the day. And I think that's where we find leadership a lot right now is in crisis and just trying to get through the week, making
Yep.
pay the next payroll, not thinking about how do we get to the future. And I think
No,
that's
so
tough.
let's focus on your employees now. So the signs of burnout are growing, which are chronic stress signals. If you should see them before you get to burnout. But 72% talk about how they feel exhausted after work, which is an increase from 60% in 2020. People are going home feeling burnt out or in chronic stress. The next one talks about how we don't use our time off. We talk about this a lot, but the most effective method for diminishing stress is using time off. But according to 27% of the managers, it's used by less than a quarter of them. So less than one quarter of 27% of people actually use their time off. And we know that to be true because Jason, you always do that when we go into a room. You ask how many people have over 2 weeks still banked up and
Mhm.
how many people raise their hand. It's typically like the whole place.
I was just in a state institution with folks of every level in a room, 30 or 40 people. And I asked, are you taking time for yourselves? How many people go home and you're exhausted? And everybody's hand in the room went up that they go home and they have nothing more to give to their families, can't decide on supper. And they're not taking time off because there's not enough people to work. They feel bad for the people that they're serving. And it's just a never ending cyclical cycle, kind of a hopeless cycle, as some folks talked about it in that room. And I think as a leader, we have to recognize how important it is that we help staff to feel safe and to feel like they can take time off and it's not going to be detrimental to them to take time off because we need to recharge. And so I don't know why this is such a hard concept, but we talk about it all the time.
It is. I know as a leader of a group of people, it can be irritating depending how people use their time off. And so there's some coaching that usually goes around it. Some people in our office are more critical. They're there certain days of the week. And when they fall out on those days of the week, it actually can kind of muck up the system of how things work. But it takes like just some conversation about, okay, who are we going to cross train? So if this happens, we can continue to do the job. So it takes a little bit of effort to be like, okay, instead of me getting just irritated, they're gone on a Monday. Well, if you're gone on a Monday, who's going to be able to do the critical pieces that have to happen so that the rest of the work continues? And it helps that person understand that too, because they're not trying to take their job by cross training and giving away all their secrets to other people or whatever. We're cross training the minimum viable product of what we have to keep the place running. And so then it helps me being less educated or less irritated about somebody being absent and really thinking about, okay, we've covered our bases for being absent, so it's fine. But it takes some effort. So again, if you're coming in as the leader and you're burnt out, you're barely making it through the week, you don't have that extra brain power to think through those things. So then you probably are really irritated and you're not modeling taking time off. So they don't want to take time off. It becomes an ongoing struggle because they feel guilty for doing it because the boss isn't doing it. And it just kind of continues. So Jason, let's flip gears here and talk about some tools. You and Brent have been working with different organizations on some different processes that are helpful to them kind of working through this when it's challenging times with people who are struggling and have their own personal issues. So what do you kind of recommend? What are you guys talking about here that could help others?
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of tools that you can use, but I mean, I think at the end of the day, we just want to help people to develop strong communication, show some empathy, and figure out how to adapt to that uncertainty while staying grounded and optimistic. I mean, that's the key elements of everything that we do is how do you stay optimistic even in times when it seems really overwhelming? Even when it looks like, we're not going to end the month to the metrics we need to end it with, either in service provision or in dollars in the bank, so we can make payroll.
Mhm.
To think about what can we do and how do we talk about that with our staff, with our leadership teams, and with our board of directors. We've been in several situations where funders aren't communicating with leaders and they aren't communicating to their boards. And
Mhm.
then all these really ridiculous things happen. Letters start
Right.
getting sent to legislators. I had to go to the Capitol to talk to a legislator. I mean, these things, like, I'm like, people, can we all just communicate? Because now we've got letters and people upset. I had a legislator calling me saying, I want to talk to you about this. And, it's
Mm.
never good when you're in trouble and you get called down to the Capitol, Renee. I know this
No.
happens to you regularly,
Yes.
but that's
It's not
not
good.
usually the place I find myself. It's not good, right? And
No.
so it's like, why are you all
No,
just talking to each other?
right. Well, and yeah, if you get those calls from the higher ups, at some point you're like, wait, what? And they tell you. So yeah, I work really hard. Communication is actually one of my stronger suits, but I did it with in the particular office I'm in. I send weekly communication all the way up the chain, and I did it because my former friend and former legislative friend who led one of the departments said, "This is what you need to do." And nobody asked me to do it, but she's like, you need to send a
Mhm.
weekly update to the people ahead of you. And she says, most of the time, they're never going to respond. They're never going to read it. But it's there if they need it and they can say, oh, yes, she told us about blank. It has saved my tail already a few times because or if they see something in it where I've written something that I keep them up to apprised on different issues or whatever. And that way, if they think it's something that bubbles up to the rise that they need to get involved, they'll call me in and say, let's talk about what you just wrote on here. What's that about? And that makes it helpful. So there's this, it's not people I call all the time, text all the time, that kind of thing, but I just give a regular cadence of information. I do the exact same thing on the days that I do a what's happening Wednesday kind of email distribution to the office. It's not a lot of brilliant information, but it's kind of like, here we are on these projects, or hey, today's Administrative Professionals Day. Let's thank our administrator for being awesome. Hey, don't forget, these deadlines for your training is coming up on these days, so get it done when you have a free time, that kind of stuff. But it keeps us all on the mission, all on the goals,
Yes.
all everybody kind of top of mind. So these are the things we're working on. But it takes ongoing work at that. I schedule them. I
It-
have tasks
yep.
that remind me every single week to get them pre-scheduled. I don't write emails at certain times of day. I pre-schedule them when I get a time to do them, and they go out there's 3 a week, and they go out on 3 different days every week. And if I don't, my task things keep reminding me, you missed this, you missed this, you missed this. And I had to set up a system. I'm not going to remember that. And people are like, how do you remember to be so consistent in your communication? I can't remember any of those things.
Right.
That's what tasks are for. I have a little notification that says, hey, send that email. I'm like, oh, yeah, I should do that. Even though I've done it
It
now for a year and a half, I still need the
it
reminder to do it.
absolutely. It takes time and effort. And I see so oftentimes leaders who just don't prioritize that. And in the absence of information, staff and subordinates make assumptions. And those assumptions are frequently completely wrong and completely in a different direction. But so oftentimes it could have simply been remediated had the leader done exactly what you do, setting that structure in place and maintaining communication, even when there's nothing new to communicate. It's important to communicate at a regular, rhythmic, ongoing way. I think it's
Right.
such a simple task. It's so difficult for some folks to do it, though. And there's some leaders who just don't do it, and it creates chaos around them all of the time.
Yep. Yep.
And it
I
just
think
makes me
this,
scratch my head. It's challenging to coach folks like that. I'll just put it that way.
yeah, it really is. Because this week or last, I think the top of my email said there's not a lot new this week because there
Right.
wasn't. But it was like not a lot new, but here's a couple of things that are happening or whatever. But you're
Mhm.
right. They still rely on that weekly cadence of conversation. They always know my door's open if they on that particular day if they need to talk to me about it or they can email me back. And again, I don't know for sure they've read them. but they're there.
Mhm.
And so if the other thing that often happens is other people are then talking about what's in it. And if people aren't the readers of your bunch, I mean, I don't know, some of these people, Jason, I don't know, maybe you might be one of these people. I go for inbox zero, where I get rid of all my email, or they're
Mhm.
filed, they're in folders.
Mhm.
My inboxes are clean. Do you know there's other people that have like thousands of emails in their inboxes that they never read? I don't understand these people at all. My brain is so not there. Don't tell me. Don't tell me. I don't want to hear about
It,
it. I know that's you. I don't want to know.
it
But
is me.
they
It
may
is
never
me.
see the
It is
email,
me.
right?
You're right.
But
Right.
it's not, I try to communicate in various ways because there's various personalities, right? So the other parts are, I might walk around the office and talk about part of it, but they know they have that email that they can reference, right? So they may not be the person that reads it, but it's there. So that if they're like, oh, she said something about a potluck, and then they know they can go look at it, right? So it's not, I can't guarantee people read the stuff. And that's not the point. The point is you're
Right.
communicating on that cadence. And if they use it, great. If they don't, great. But what it does do for you is it covers your tail if something goes wrong, because then they're like, she didn't tell us about that. And then you go look at it with, oh, yeah, she did. And so then it's like, don't yell at me. I wrote it down. You didn't ask
Mhm.
or seek clarification. So, I mean, it is hard. It's hard to teach it though. You're right. It's hard
You
to
know,
teach
and
it if you don't do it.
and we use some frameworks, right? And so I really like the five dysfunctions of a team. And so we'll
Okay.
put a link in that. It's a great book. There's some great resources that come along with that. But, really, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, the five
Mhm,
dysfunctions of team are built upon trust, right? And so, or, in this case,
mhm.
the absence of trust. How do you build trust? Well, regular
Yeah.
communication, all the things we've been talking about, right?
Right.
The fear of conflict, right? We've got to be able to
Mhm.
have a little bit of conflict in our workplace. That's how we grow. That's how we learn. That's how we get different ideas in the room. If we have a place where there's never any conflict, then there's never change. And so we got to think about how do you do that in a safe way? How do we demonstrate that commitment toward the mission, right? How do we make sure
Mhm.
everyone has the same level of commitment? And how do we really talk about accountability, right?
Mhm.
Because so many of us avoid accountability. And to be a healthy, strong organization and leadership team, we have to be accountable to each other. And only after we do all of those things can we really focus on results, because that will then drive the results moving forward. And so when we think about those dysfunctions, and what each one of those things mean and how we build up to that, I think it's a really great framework to have lots of conversations. And that's a lot of the work, that we do is we reference back to that, because all the things we talked
Yeah.
about are directly very relatable. I just really
Right.
love how that's been put together.
Yeah. And what you really want is that culture where other people start doing that too, right? You're
Hmm.
trying to model
Right.
what you as the leader, but you want others to do it too. So you want them to be communicating on a regular cadence. You want them to hold other people accountable.
Yep.
You really are onto something when your team can hold each other accountable and you don't have to be the only one
Right.
as the leader to say something. And so when other
Right.
people catch that so and so didn't do what they're supposed to do, I'm like, well, did you mention it to them, rather than having to come to me to have to do it all? And so you really can, it's a model for your own way of dealing with the office, but then it helps teach others how to lead themselves and to be influencers. And you've got influential people in your space, regardless of their title. We always do.
Mhm.
And so how to help them become better leaders. And if they say, I want to be a leader, then you have to help them. You have to give them the information of
Right.
how to do that. And so, yeah, it's really good stuff. So we've got some things linked for you today about the statistics of leadership, and then more information about these leadership tools of the five dysfunctions of a team, that maybe that it'd be helpful to you. If you have questions about that, please reach out to Jason. He and Brent have become really pretty good experts in that particular realm of working with various groups on how to deal with those particular issues, because it's it's pretty similar across a lot of different platforms,
Hmm.
a lot of different provider groups, a lot of different organizations. We struggle the same. And so that's why some of these truths are useful in any kind of context and setting. So today, the recovering politician self-care policy of the week is increased training. So I think I've told you this story before, but when I got to my office, it was fairly dysfunctional. And so I'm sure the five dysfunctions of a team were all acknowledged in my one space. And my tendency was to put people into group therapy, which you cannot do in an office. So I talked
Yeah.
to some people smarter than me, and they said, what could help you get there is training. And I'm like, tell me more about that. So I've been bringing in different types of training. Internal training is not my fave where I am. So I bring in external training. And external training gives us new points of view because they had done the internal and got to where they got. And that was as high as it was going to get. So we needed to get out of
Hmm.
that and get a new perspective. But it's really been helpful with office culture, with leadership, with growth. And kind of all going the same direction on the mission. And so I would highly, highly recommend. And how does that relate to self-care? I'm telling you what, it brought my stress level down because now I have other experts with eyes on. And so I'm not the only person. They've gotten to know the players and know their personalities to some degree. And so now I have a sounding board, a contact, a help for myself so that if I get stuck with somebody, I can say, hey, how should I work with them based on what you know about their personality, their background, their, leadership skills? How's the best way for me to interact with them to be respectful of that person? I've got lots of varied personalities, and so one way is not going to work. So sometimes I need to talk to somebody about, well, how would be the best way to approach that person so that they feel respected and honored and a part of our team, but that they get the message that we need to change some things. And so it's been super helpful for me. So for me, as a leader, just getting somebody as a support outside of my organization that can give me some feedback just really reduced my stress. So Jason, do you see that in the organizations you work with when they bring you guys in, that it can be helpful to kind of calm things down in those workplaces?
It is, and sometimes you got to stir things up a little bit before they can get calmed down. And the number one thing that I see is folks get stuck, and then they get stuck in that group think because anytime you've been a leader for any length of time, you surround yourself with people you like. You
Yeah.
surround yourself with like-minded people, and then it becomes even harder to change, and it's even harder to see
So true.
things for clearly for what they really are. And so I see really good people who over time drift, and they drift in the
Yeah.
mission, they drift in who they are because they're surrounded by people that insulate themselves, I like to say, from reality. And then when you're so insulated from reality, you don't make good decisions anymore. And
No.
because you get rid of all those disruptors around you. And you know what?
Oh,
Everybody needs a good disruptor, right? And so it's how do you manage and keep people who are disruptive enough to help you see clearly? Because that's the thing that sometimes you have one person in the office that gets labeled as a disruptor. They're difficult, they're challenging. Well, they're pointing out something you probably need to hear. And you may not like the way they do it. You may have other things about it. And so that's really the importance of, as you think about coaching and you think about how do you use external trainings, you have to be open to some of those things. And that's being vulnerable. And this is the hard thing about leaders. And I see this happen. And this is why I'm a consultant today, because I don't want to grow old being one of those leaders that only sees things one way and can't change. And,
agreed.
and that's the key element of this is how do you stay acute enough, and in tune with yourself and your own
Yep.
stuff so that you can manage moving forward. And that's the importance of coaching. That's the importance of external training. It's the importance of going through and having facilitators move your leadership team through, is because we can help to challenge those things and help keep people honest and reel them back when they need to be reeled back in. I think that's the hard part, Renee.
Yep. And I failed to mention this, but a big part of the training is self-awareness for myself. Because when you know my personality and you deal with any personality wheel, there's going to be specific ones that are
Yep.
going to automatically be my opposite that are more
Right.
challenging. And of course, you always have them in an office. I have almost one of every personality in my office. And so, but to know that when they rub me wrong helps me know that that's because I'm who I
Hmm.
am. It's not because of them, it's
Hmm.
because of me. So you're
Right.
absolutely right. It's coaching helps so much, just give you the tools you need to be like, are they really a disruptor? Or is that just not your personality? Kind of work
Right.
through those things. So today we hopefully gave you some options. We were talking today just about what we could do with the turbulent times going on, challenging times. How do you lead through that? Talked a lot about some different types of data and research about what those challenges are and look like. We've got some things in the show notes. You could go see what some of those data points are, which might be really useful for you in your office. You could take those, statistics and say, hey, where do you think we fall with these statistics in our own office, and challenge yourself to go look. We talked also about leadership tools, using those 5 dysfunctions of a team to help get your team moving in the right direction. But before we go, we want to remind you to please follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. If you leave us a positive review, we'll send you a prize. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye.